So, today we're going to break down a pretty provocative new argument about how to tackle urban crime in America. It's all coming from a recent commentary that's been making some serious waves online. And its whole premise, this bold claim, and, let's be honest, a controversial solution, it all really hinges on just one single number.
And that number is 12. See, the source we're looking at asks this really powerful question. What would it mean if a major American city went 12 full days without a single murder, and it happened during its most violent month of the year? Well, the commentary claims this isn't just some hypothetical. It claims it just happened. And its explanation for why? Well, that's the core of this entire argument.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the initial claim and what it calls the DC test case. Then, we'll zoom out and look at the underlying philosophy of force being pushed here. After that, we'll see how the source applies all this to a political showdown in Chicago. And we're going to wrap it all up by digging into something called the repeat offender thesis, which is really the foundation for this whole viewpoint.
All right, let's jump in. First up is the big claim, and it's all about what the source is describing as this really sudden, really dramatic shift that just happened in Washington, D.C.
So to really build this argument, the source starts by setting the scene. It uses this term, the killing season, to talk about the month of August. The claim is that this is when murders usually spike, because of the warmer weather. And framing it this way is absolutely crucial to their argument, because they want to convince you that a 12-day pause in murders isn't just a coincidence, it's a huge, unprecedented event.
Okay, so if this event was such a big deal, how does the source actually explain it? That brings us right to the DC test case and the specific reason the commentary gives for this sudden change. The argument points to a whole bunch of things beyond just the murder rate. According to the source, it wasn't just that. They claim carjackings were way down, robberies were down, but arrests, they were up, and immigration arrests were way up. To kind of bolster all this, it also brings up these anecdotal stories from DC residents who apparently felt this sudden wave of safety in their own neighborhoods. And the source, well, it doesn't beat around the bush about who it thinks is responsible. It comes right out and says, quote, "This is President Trump proving you can stop black-on-black crime." So with that one sentence, it very explicitly connects all this alleged success in D.C. to a very specific federal intervention. So the source uses this D.C. example as a kind of launch pad, right? It's not just about analyzing one city, it's about pushing for a much broader ideology. So our next section gets into this proposed philosophy of force.
What the source basically does here is lay out two completely different ways of thinking about crime. On one side, you have what it calls the left's approach, which it says focuses on root causes, using social workers and community programs. And on the other side, that's the solution it's proposing, a laser focus on enforcement, bringing in federal troops or the National Guard, what the speaker boils down to, simply, just force. The whole argument is that one of these has failed, and the other, well, the DC example just proved it works.
Okay, so if DC was the successful experiment, then the source points to Chicago as the next big challenge. This next part is all about how this model could be applied there and the huge political fight that the source fully expects to happen.
And to really paint a picture of this political battle, the source highlights this quote that it attributes to Chicago's mayor, Brandon Johnson. His supposed response to the idea of federal troops coming in. Quote, "The people in this city are accustomed to rising up against tyranny." Then, to add another layer to this, the source points to a video from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. In it, he's filming right on Chicago's beautiful lakefront, and he's pushing back against the idea that the city is some kind of hellhole. He says, "It doesn't feel like a hellhole here."
But the source has this really sharp geographical comeback. The challenge it throws back at the governor is simple. Go 1.5 miles west. The whole point is to argue that the view from the wealthy, scenic lakefront is not at all representative of what the entire city is experiencing when it comes to crime.
And they don't just leave it at that. The source gets really specific, listing out several neighborhoods. The challenge is for the governor to go visit places like East Garfield Park, Lawndale, or the area near Simeon High School without security, arguing that the experience there would be a whole different world.
This whole focus on specific high-crime areas, it all builds to the final and maybe the most important piece of the source's argument, the repeat offender thesis. This is its answer to the question of who exactly is driving the problem.
And that argument is built around another really powerful number, 11.
The source claims that the average person who commits murder in Washington, D.C. has been arrested 11 times before committing that murder. The conclusion it draws from that is that the system is just failing, over and over again, to keep known, dangerous offenders off the streets.
And the source says, look, this isn't just about violent crime. It brings up data on property crime in New York City to back this up. The claim here is that just 300 people, 300, are responsible for over 6,000 shoplifting arrests. The point it's making is that a very small group of repeat offenders is responsible for a huge, disproportionate amount of all crime, and that targeting them should be the main strategy.
So where does this all leave us? Well, the source material basically puts a really stark choice on the table. On one hand, the promise of increased public safety, but achieved through federal force, and on the other hand, the long-held principle of local control. As this argument gets more and more attention, the question it really leaves us with is this: is this the future of how we govern our cities?